Hi, I'm Garm One, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Julian. How's it going?
It's been real busy, but really promising. So
That's pretty good for, a Kickstarter. A lot of these are very chaotic.
yeah, no, no, it's always kind of because this is certainly a lot bigger than my previous Kickstarter. So there's
Yeah,
a lot more pressure than there was in the first time around. For those who might not know, I kickstarted Into the Now last year with the goal about $2,000 and made about like 4,500 plus at the time.
that's pretty good.
And it's pretty good and also pretty naive, but it all worked out, all things
Yeah,
considered. I
yeah,
had a
these,
lot things come up last year that threw a wrench into it, but it came out and it exists, and hopefully the second time around will be a lot easier.
yeah, it's been a pretty chaotic couple of years for sure.
Oh yeah, and having all the systems worked out and whatnot, I imagine is really going to help. Well, it's already really helping because I'm already writing it, but it makes it a lot easier that I have all my assumptions settled.
Yeah, for sure. So, you're here today to tell us a little bit about Mutants in the Next, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, I should. Mutants in the Now is basically my love letter to the mutant animal games of the 80s, 90s, 00s. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, After the Bomb, all that. It kind of started. Somebody just off said. It was James Holloway that's just kind of posted on Twitter like, somebody should revive this. All you'd have to do is like remove things, and that would be easy. Um, and speaking of naivete, and the but with all thanks to him for spurring me on. And so I sat down and started for Zine Quest. I figured I could do it in 48 pages, and years passed, and I have 120 page book. I think marking me as a true tabletop designer. But it was one of my first games. It was my first game I owned, I should say. And so it was pretty special to me, and the fact that it's the both the creator and the license having passed on in various regards, kind of left. Despite the fact that this was a really huge game for folks, like I think it sold like 200,000 at the time over the years. It was a lot of people's first game. There really hasn't been a there have been follow-ups, but there haven't really been any sustained follow-ups. There have been things like supplements for Savage Worlds and other systems that don't really they're good, but they don't really capture the same feel. And that's really why I know Recapture was what I remember this game being like, and also just kind of updating to what how it can actually fulfill that in the modern day. So next is going to be the first expansion for it. In the first book, we only had animals mutating towards a humanoid, and this is basically the opposite. It's you've got the first book is your turtles. The second one is lets you do stuff like Bebop and Rocksteady. Um, and also doing wild mutations, which are more random mutations. Normally, you get to pick them, but these are going to be just really, odd stuff like I have two heads. I have feathers even though I'm a lizard. Fur bearing trout, that sort of thing. And also just more of everything, more species, more fighting styles, more psionics, just because there's just so much room you can explore, particularly with like the methodology I used where all the species are pretty specific and the martial arts are pretty specific. It's not like a generalized thing. I mean, I chose that largely because I felt it's more evocative to say that I am a brown bear rather than, I am just a bear asterisk villain type.
Yeah, for sure. So, what's the default setting of Mutants in the Now? Is it well, and Mutants in the Next, of course. Is it more of the like post-apocalyptic range of the setting, or more towards the modern vigilante kind of style?
It's the modern vigilante. One thing that when I first looked at doing it, I saw that there were a fair number of games that are still doing animals, mutant animals in the future, even if it's just a sideline like mutant. I don't remember if it has a. It's hard for me to identify it, but the game Mutant has, of course, mutant animals, but that's just kind of a sideline for it. Stuff like Gamma World has, various Gamma World knockoffs and Biblos have that sort of thing as well. There's a really promising game looking 5e game that was being hinted at the time, but has never seen the light of day. It's
Ah,
called
yes,
Van.
Feral. Yeah, I've played.
It
I've
looks
played with the race rules. They're pretty fun.
Yeah, it looked pretty neat. But I don't think it's really. I think it's just kind of fallen by the wayside for now, unfortunately, because I
Yeah.
I really liked how like the dimension rules looked and actually kind of paralleled some ideas I had when I was already because I've already been thinking about time travel. That, but in a much more grim way than I'm doing. But yeah, no, so I decided to go for the modern day because it's a very good core. I don't have to worry about doing a ton of world building just yet. I do want to do that sort of thing, but I wanted to make sure I had a take that was distinct from all the others because um, just wanted to make sure I had a more modern, I suppose, apocalypse than the classic like '80s nuclear fear apocalypse.
Right. And yeah, it's an easy kind of genre to get into because everybody in like the Anglosphere has some idea about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the various knockoffs from the '90s, Street Sharks and so on.
Yeah, sharks and of course, I'm inspired by a lot of different things from, Asaki Yojimbo to Rocket Raccoon and all sorts of things. So, um, but it is definitely focused around the modern vigilante, just because I'm also I would say certainly Mutants in the Now is probably one of my less political works, but that's still in there, and I still like to kind of have commentary and that sort of thing, and it's a lot easier to do with modern day.
Right. So is this a crunchier kind of a system or more towards the freeform end of things?
It's fairly crunchy. It's got the non-combat tends more towards freeform, just because I didn't, by no means I think it would necessarily benefit from having a really detailed spycraft-esque skill system or GURPS for that matter. But at the same time, but combat is fairly kind of, I call it light tactical. It's got a lot of different options, and I worked very hard to try and make sure that each that's not there's not necessarily one right optional. And part of the way I did that was just allowing people to take two actions a turn, and only one of those is normally like a damaging attack. And so that makes you kind of forces you to go, okay, I attack, and then what else? And that opens up like people thinking about what fancy stuff they want to do in a fight that normally you might not do in a game like say Pathfinder, because Pathfinder First Edition, because you're like, I could swing for damage and eliminate an enemy, or I could trip them. I guess it's pretty hard. Uh, so I tried to make sure that you can vary up combat. There's all sorts of stuff for improvisation, for knocking people into things. If you want, like, if you're fighting on a roof, you can try and knock them off the roof. And a lot of things that were spurred on by playtesting, like the idea of not, having somebody swing at you and ducking out of the way and having hit somebody else. That kind of neat little tricks all over the place. So
Right on. Yeah, very much in line with its, inspirations in that manner.
yeah.
So why the choice to go for, humans being mutated into animals for this expansion?
A lot of people asked for it. That was kind of I wanted it in the core rules, and I realized with the way I work the background tables, where you have a lot of like D100 rules to make to get through your background, that adding in humans would just expand that by like 3 times in the space. And so it was one of the first things I had cut, along with Wild Mutations, which was originally plotted out for the first book as well. And so I decided that was the thing to focus on, just because like people have kind of asked mainly for two things, that and a post-apocalypse setting. um and the post-apocalypse setting I'm kind of putting aside and wanting to focus on the core and not get not get too distracted by it initially, and have like two different settings, and right off the bat. But it was basically just there's a lot of demand for it. It's something I wanted to do from the from the beginning. So now I have the room to do it.
Right on. Are there any other aspects of Mutants in the Next or Mutants in the Now that you'd like to talk about while you're here?
Yeah, there's I think one of the things that's interesting in it, in that since I'm kind of bringing back that old style character creation system where you're doing a lot of rolling and then spending points and making a lot of decisions. One thing I feel like has been somewhat lost in a lot of modern games is the idea of character creation as a game itself. Um, One of the things, like it's easy to see why a lot of people have moved towards simplified systems. Like for example, if you're playing like D&D Fifth Ed, you really just need to roll your attributes, pick your like three or four things, and then maybe spells, and you're pretty much done. There isn't a whole lot of friction as far as getting between you and just sitting down and playing. And this has a lot of friction in sitting down and playing, but that's intentional. And because of that, when people sit, go through the character creation, one thing I've heard over and over is just like, I'm so invested in this character now. Part of it is just having cool animals. Like I'm playing an otter, or I'm playing, a weird goldfish mutant. And that's really easy to, kind of envision and think about cool things for, because they'll always just, whatever animal you are is going to be a really cool gimmick. Um, there are really no lame animals per se. And even the animals I thought of as lame when I was going through research, it's like, oh no, there's like blue jays have cool stuff going on. So going through that kind of character generation really helps invest people in the character and in the story you're going to tell with them. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about kind of going to this old style of design. I mean, it's probably even more in depth than the original. But that's just because I wanted to avoid things like in the original you might have like bears and wolverines have very similar traits, and so wolverines just end up being kind of like bears minus. And I wanted to make sure every species has its own unique trait, and all martial arts are specific. So when you create a character, it is your character. So
And is species randomly determined, or is that chosen?
it uses mitigated randomness, which is you roll randomly, but you have a number of points take backs you can use to either re-roll or to basically flip your roll, make your ones digit and tens digit, flip them around.
Oh, that's
So a
cool.
13, a 31, and so it kind of gives some degree of choice, but it gives a limited choice. So like you'll have like three or four different possibilities depending on how many take backs you spend, and so it kind of helps narrow down the list of 120 species, and avoids the whole analysis paralysis in that sense.
Yeah, and you might not get a bear, but there are plenty of cool animals, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. I say one of the things is like in playtest, I've somebody who would normally probably play like a cool like immortal occultist, or like a cool swordsman, and he was playing a kind of a mother hen sheep as it turned, because of how everything turned out. Who's always like you have the other two who are much more like impulsive, and she's always going around and like making sure they're safe and all that. And it was a very different role for him. And so it's kind of neat to see, and I kind of call it like discovering your character as much as creating them.
Yeah, absolutely. In the grand tradition of old school character generation, can you die in character generation?
No, you cannot.
It's probably for the
Um,
best.
in fact, one of the things I took off the table in combat was death in general. Mainly because it simplifies things in terms of like in most modern, like this is very kind of informed by modern D20 games and that sort of thing. As far as like updating the old D20 based system. And with that, took death off because that means you don't have to worry as much about balancing each encounter and focusing on every encounter being finely tuned. You can get beaten up by the bad guys and get captured or whatever, and it's a lot less high state. It's basically there isn't that lose condition where you just we're all dead. Well, roll up a new campaign, I guess. Not that people really do that. People usually find some way around that. But that's why, like, games like D&D have like these strong encounter structures, is because it's all to get around the fact that they have death. Um, and So one of the I found it interesting to do that. Not to say that death is either completely off the table, but it's a conversational. If you think it's an appropriate character for him to die, the game master can go, ask and that sort of thing, and they can discuss. And if it's totally untenable, you can work out something terrible happening instead. You know.
Right on, right on. So, yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up? Because this sounds really cool, and I'm enjoying hearing about it.
No. I think one thing, another thing, just to talk about, was in terms of like world building. When you're doing a setting like this that comes out of like the 80s, the great like fears were like nuclear war and like crime.
Right.
There are many others, but a lot of like old, if you're like reading old Daredevil comics or Turtles comics, you've got the scum of the earth roaming the streets with their switchblades, and you got to go punch them a lot. And I have basically a big sidebar that's like, maybe think about whether or not you're just going around beating up poor people. Um, a lot of the villains, like you have the big corporate villains. You have ninjas, but I kind of walk a tightrope, because a lot of the ninja stuff in a lot of 80s media is kind of tied part and parcel with Yellow Peril and the fears of Japanese takeover in the
And
80s.
Orientalism, even when it's positive, yeah.
Yeah, and so basically what I tried to go for was a a much more, these are ninjas that are born out of pop culture, where they basically use the ninja myth to basically become so ridiculous that police don't know how to deal with them or don't take them seriously, or that sort of thing. And where they just trying to do things that are just so outlandish, that they basically, that law enforcement doesn't know quite what their deal is or how to deal with them. That's why they're interested. Once they start finding out about mutant animals, it's like, well, that's outlandish. Who's going to talk about being robbed by a giant robin? So and of course I have some like hints of like interdimensional stuff. You have a villain that's very much like, that's where I can start getting to like the really cartoony stuff, the really because I find it easier to do with something that's like kind of other dimensional. I want to avoid kind of like the super Lex Luthor villain, where they're super super capable, but they're also pretty fascistic. And I wanted to make sure my human villains were more, well, human, and that they had that kind of like banality of evil, like the corporation is dangerous because they have a lot of power and a lot of money and not many scruples. But they're not powerful because they're all, you don't have that like 1990s comic where they have all gleaming surfaces and, power armor for the place. They're not that advanced. They're just, willing to recruit private military companies and things like that. So
And, pay off the occasional government official and all that fun stuff.
yeah, one of the big threads is like them trying to see if they can basically get ownership of the means and mutation in the group, and get legal control of it. And that means, can they get to the point where they say, well, we own everything that's created by this? Because that's the exact sort of terrible thing you see going on these days. So
Yeah, I'm not naming any specific corporation, but I am thinking of one. Several, actually.
yeah, I was definitely inspired by a number of real life bad people. It's kind of amalgam of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where my kind of like political stuff come in. It's not like some of my previous games like Anarchopunk 2020, which is blatant anarchist greed. Not that I personally am that like strong an anarchist, but it was very much kind of like that particular little game was a statement on all the games that have like punk in their name but aren't. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, focused on recreating the Battle of Seattle and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I do have one last question about
sure.
characters. One of the staples of the inspirational media is the human sidekick. Like April, Casey Jones. I'm sure there was somebody in Street Sharks, but I'm gonna be honest, I've never actually watched Street Sharks, which is probably a problem, but I'll get around to it. Is
I've been going through so many turtle cartoons that I've gone through 12 seasons, and there are 20. So
Yeah, I've been working through the 2012 series by coincidence, and it's fantastic. It's shockingly good. But yeah, is that an option here?
it will be an option
Okay.
in next. In the original rules, and now there are rules for like contacts and things like that, and that was very much a big part of that game. But if you want to actually just play a human, that will be in next. Because once we have humans, that gives me all the structure I need to just make humans an option for those who want it. So
For those who are just convincing themselves that they're not a furry, they can't be a furry. They must stay as far away as possible from the fur.
I'm not I'm not a furry myself, but I do like my anthropomorphic funny books, certainly. And I've just been willing to embrace that kind of thing. As long as I'm avoiding anything that's like blatantly fetishistic, I'm cool with it. So
I'm also not a furry, but the funny animal fandom does sure put out some good work.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Julian, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Um, this is currently up on Kickstarter. Funding right now. It's got was like 20 some days left.
It's gonna be until June 10th.
Right on. And yeah, well, go pick this up. The creators has done things, put products out. It's got cool art. It will actually come out, and you can beat the crap out of things as a giant bear. Like, come on.
Yeah, no, I've got Sophie Campbell working on art, and she's the current like writer and scribe on the Turtles comic.
Oh,
Uh,
nice. That's a good
yeah,
pickup there. Yeah.
Fabio Fontes, who people have just loved his art, and they've been like, "Is he inspired by like this old Palladium artist?" I'm like, "No, I don't think he even knows of them." He had a black. I worked with him when I worked at a previous game company, and his black and white pieces were just like, they're just perfect for it. And I've got like I've got Will Jobs. They're working on editing. And he's done a lot of really cool indie stuff like Torque and Campfire. I've got Crystal Frazier of like Cheer Up and Pathfinder, Gamma Flight, and she's uh, in the stretch goals for an adventure. I have Darren Calvert, who did work for Mutants and Masterminds and Acquisition Incorporated and a ton of other tabletop work.
Yeah, and
Um,
Aaron Clooney in the stretch goals as well.
Ellen Clooney, who I co-wrote a book called Back to the Rifter with, which was kind of a commentary and comedy book on the old Rifts game. I should say old because it's still getting books, but
Well, it
um,
still is perpetually old, regardless
yeah,
of what
it
comes out.
has not gotten a new core book in 15, in 17 years. So,
Yeah.
um, but there was so I've got an Ellen who's worked on a ton of his own games like Hangagami High and Magical Fury, and also translate Golden Sky Stories and Maids. So yeah, no, we've got a lot of amazing people lined up, and I've got some other people asking, and I'm going to go. I want to see how far we get first, So people have been asking about whether or not there will be more stretch goals, and I'm like, when we get there, we get there, because I don't want to put in stretch goals just for the purpose of putting in stretch goals. I want to make sure I've got some ideas, and I'm willing to put those ideas in there, but I don't want to get into the whole infinite expansion.
Yeah, stretch
That
goal. Yeah, stretch goal bloat is real. It's
I worked with a guy and worked with a company that had a real problem with that.
yeah.
Uh, so you have to just be careful and keep within the focus of the project.
Yeah,
And
I've backed
more
things.
money that makes things stable, so I can put out more.
Yeah. Well, you lovely viewers, go back this so we can get, weird tables and stuff, because weird
Yeah,
tables are the lifeblood of the hobby, honestly.
I have
Uh,
so many more tables. I want Ellen to do some more too, on top
yeah.
of what I'm already doing. So
Yeah, Love me a good weird table. But the link is below. Please go back this because I want it. I want it with all the weird stuff. So
Yeah,
yes, and
I enjoyed it. Well,
thank you for coming on. It's been lovely talking to you.
it's been good talking to you too, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
All right, very welcome. And
Let's check it out on Kickstarter.
yeah, and for those of you watching, have a good night.
Take it easy.